recording again with my digital camera and the film feature that it has. My desktop computer is not back, so we're going to make the most of it today. I've got 20 minutes on this SD card, so this will be fast. But again, we benefit from a genuine fire for our fireside chat. Want to give a few shout outs. First of all, a shout out that goes to Lisa, talking about retirements and opportunities for change. I know I responded to this in a thread and I wanted to elaborate on it. One of the things about veteran teachers is veteran teachers have seen so many initiatives come and go in their time that I think it's hard sometimes to build up that momentum for a new initiative, knowing that, you know, a typical principal lasts 3 or 4 years in a building, and then when the principal leaves, the initiatives typically change, or if the superintendent changes. So that's where I was getting more at, where somebody who's in a building or in a district for any period of time kind of has that wave they ride of, you know, build up 4 initiatives and then coming down, and then that kind of modulates out. But I always think it's a wonderful blend when you have teachers of all experiences and all ages, as long as everybody gets to voice their opinion at the table. And that's one thing I spoke to a elementary principal about. I said, what's the hardest part when you have meetings? In this case, it was about their PBIS team. And he said the hardest part is to encourage the newer teachers to speak up and to give their 2 cents. They seem to default to the other teachers. So everyone, he said, I need to kind of encourage everybody to give their input. So, Aaron, you wrote that we don't always test what we value. How true that is. And I think another part of that is we often don't know what we value. An example of that goes back to part of my literature review for my dissertation. And in the hospital sector, there was a study, I might have mentioned this before, but they looked at priorities and what hospitals had identified as priorities. And once they really scrutinized those, they found out that 65% of what was identified was not a priority, meaning it really wasn't a value. So I think there's also a part of really understanding your values. And there were a number of very robust mission statements that were provided. How often do you revisit your mission statement? When I worked in a district, we heard it when it was presented at a board meeting. Did we revisit it? I don't think we ever did. But a number of you mentioned you have classroom mission statements. I mean, quarterly, do you go back and as a whole class going to say, hey, are we doing this? Are we doing this? Are we doing this? What are examples, or what are some things that we need to change, just to make sure that you're recalibrating. And I don't think that happens. So Maddie, you talked about growth and benchmarks, the importance of recognizing growth in addition to just attainment. And we know there's so much pressure to recognize attainment. The DPI actually in 2009 had an effort for value added scores. And it was very challenging because there's countless variables that come into play. So it might be a school where students have a certain percentage of free and reduced lunch, transient, whatever it might be, these different variables that come in, and then it would kind of weight that school a little heavier than schools that had lower free and reduced lunch, less transient population. And so there was a weighting system that the DPI was using, value added, in 2009. I don't think much has happened with it since, and the reason is I just think it's really complex to try to do that type of system. I mean, again, there's so many variables. But what it does recognize, and what it does show clearly, is the department wanting to recognize, acknowledge growth, because we know from a federal level it's so set on attainment. So, I liked where you said, meeting, um, we meet kids where they're at. And I want to tell a quick story on that, and I'll make sure I check my time here. So I have a student I work with, and a high school student who's disfluent, and one of the ways that we work on fluency is the student is a rapper. So he writes his own raps, and they are very elaborate, like 4 pages and just, but he will rap 95 to 98% fluent. And if you've ever seen the video Scatman, it's about a man who, when he sings, he's fluent, but when he speaks, he stutters. It's kind of like that a little bit. And he's getting very good at judging his own work, and we work then on kind of transferring that over to discussion. But it was one of those things where he presented it to me and said, would you feel comfortable if this was a way that I worked on this? Because I'm very fluent when I rap. And I agreed, as long as it wasn't anything that was over the line. So never in a million years did I think I'd be, recording rap songs on an iPad and converting them over and making a little disc, for him and stuff like that. But it's an incredible therapy tool. But then that's meeting him where he's at. And for that child, that's where you had to meet him. I mean, with his, not to get into, but with background and everything, like that's where you needed to meet him. A little bit of humor. One is, it seems like these cooking shows that focus with kids on, 10, 11, 12-year-olds, the Rachel Ray type stuff and the cook-offs, and it seems to be all that's on TV right now, and we all get a kick out of it as a family. But you watch some of these kids, and when they, you didn't make the cut or whatever, you've been cut, and then they kind of put the head down and thank everybody, and they walk off. But in the background, once they get out of sight, they're probably saying, if I would have just gotten the better whisk, if I would have, been closer to the ice cream or the sorbet machine, this would have had a different ending. So, but I just get a kick from some of, because they don't hide their emotions at all. So I'm sure backstage, you some stuff like that. But I just thought the whisk thing was kind of funny. So April Fool's pranks. My chair at work was saran wrapped and a lot of things in my office. And one of the things I did though is I did play a prank. I have a student who is an avid fan, and his family collects air raid sirens, used air raid sirens. And there's a model called a Thunderbolt, and you could YouTube it. It has a certain sound. And I went outside of his class in the morning with my phone, and I found it on YouTube, and I started to play it, and I played it soft, and I started to play a little louder, just so I was looking at the door by the class. No one knew I was there. And all of a sudden one of the students said, "What is that noise?" And the one student who knows these sirens, and all of a sudden he said, "That's a thunderbolt! That's a thunderbolt! Something's going on, that's a thunderbolt." And then of course I walked in the room and everybody just got a laugh. And but the fact that all of a sudden he picked up on it, and yeah, so let's talk about a review of Module 4. And first of all, I think everyone was impacted by Rita Pearson. And many of you wrote just how emotional that was, to read, not to read, but to watch Rita and hear her stories. And, some of the things like, putting crackers in the student's desk to, because you knew they weren't going to have food, or they need a snack, and I had mentioned others, but Rita Pearson's phenomenal. I can watch so much of her stuff and just get so many different pieces of motivation for inclusion. The mission statements, I thought those were extremely well done. Circle of courage, and then also the role of leadership in the mission statement. Again, I thought those were very key points. So, very nice job on the mission statements. And page 59 of the text, building a vision. So, let's see, clarifying assumptions. So, I'm reading down off some of my notes. Focus on interest. You meet someone. So here it is. You meet someone, instead of saying, hi, I'm a teacher, hi, I'm an architect, hi, I'm whatever. It can be, hi, I like to be outside when the weather's, great like this. Or, hi, I really enjoy the sense of, humor that kids come in with this time of year, for the playground stories. But you move it from what you do to an experience, and I think that's a whole different way to present also a vision. It's hard to explain, but the book Dale Carnegie has, which I have over here, I'd have to dig out, but if you Google Dale Carnegie, there's a number of books that he wrote on how to successfully have an influence on people. And one of the things that Dale did is, he was a pretty average, shy person, but what he did is he would engage people in conversation and learn about their interests, and then come back and visit those interests and let people talk about their interests. And he gets into the whole story of how, there's the Carnegie Institute of how to conduct speeches and so forth, but he talks about this whole system that he had developed, which was largely based on listening and making sure that you're recognizing the interest of others. So when we talk about building a vision, I've seen a number of visions that have been built from one set of eyes. And that's not vision. That's the case where a superintendent lasts less than 3 years and they're gone, because they came in and said, here's what we're going to do, and got a board to go behind it, and no one else was on board, and gone. One of the strange phenomena that exist is there's legacy knowledge for about 3 years in almost any school, meaning that after 3 years, pretty much everything is forgotten. So if I have asked people what happened here 3 years ago in this capacity, this capacity, this capacity with some detail, most people could not give that, even if they've been there 20, 25 years. But when you're building a vision, it's a team vision, it's a collective vision, just like the mission statements you shared with how your students contributed in your classroom. But again, we get narrow visions sometimes, and if the vision doesn't include inclusion in all students, then that's a very narrow vision that need to close the eyes and then open up 100 eyes and see what's out there, and then reframe that, because again, those statements can be narrow or they can be inclusive. One of the things also that's happening is you're seeing more of these community gatherings for building a vision for the district. So they'll have stakeholder meetings and focus groups and things. And I think that's good in that capacity to do that. And then you can come back and kind of, did we follow where we thought we would be versus like what the district vision was for technology and for. So you're talking maybe 100 people from the community come in and they say, like, here's what we think is good about the school. Here's what we think students are going to need to know in 10 years. Here's what we think students are going to need to know in 20 years. Our people. So, those types of meetings are very good, and I think it also opens up the door to talk about inclusion, because it's going to talk about diversity of the district that naturally will become part of that discussion. So I have about 5 minutes. I'm going to look ahead to Module 5. Module 5 is the big emphasis on co-teach, teach and assist, station teaching, but really like co-teaching. And there's a lot of co-teaching or team teaching, which really is not co-teaching. That's the word I'm going to use, co-teaching. What it is it's a special education teacher and a regular education teacher. The regular education teacher is delivering all the instruction, and the special education teacher is helping students with disabilities or possibly some other students. There is an imbalance, and the students know it. That is not a co-teaching model. That is a teach and assist model. A true co-teaching model is one that I talked about in my previous Fireside chat of some of my experiences. But that's where you're having common planning time, planning with the regular education teacher, special education teacher, also looking at data. So there's professional learning communities that include special education teachers, but that is critical. You have the common planning time, and that both teachers can deliver the instruction. Even if it's not 100% of the instruction, both are delivering instruction to the class, and both can mingle around with students and see how they're doing, and it's not perceived by the student as that's the teacher and that's the special ed helper, because that's what happens. There's discussion of station teaching, and I think there's a lot to be learned from station teaching. If we think about going back to the early days of, both pre-K, early childhood, and you had the station you went to, and it might be the grocery store, so you had empty cans, and you had like a pretend checkout thing, and maybe a counter and a basket. So it was a station. So you were learning at that station. Now, of course, we can age that to any level and any skill, but letting students learn from station teaching, I think, is valuable. So there is a rubric in the syllabus for a co-teach model, and that is not for a specific assignment. You do not need to use that rubric for any type of assignment. So there's some reference in there kind of like that, but ignore that. You just need to answer the question about what do you see in your school? Do you see co-teach, teach and assist, station teaching? Do you see all of it? Do you see moving toward one model, not toward another? Is a barrier common planning time? Is a barrier that you've had turnover in administration? Just people not buying into it? What's the deal? So those are the things that I want you to talk about. If you're not currently in a school, talk about experiences you've had that you can reflect upon. If that doesn't work, find somebody that is currently teaching and ask that question. So, but that's the way that you need to approach that. So basically you are going to kind of focus on one classroom and identify what's happening. Co-teaching, teach and assist, station teaching, and maybe if you have the opportunity to interview the teacher, put a little bit of that down in your response. So, but again, the syllabus, I think, gives some guides of in that rubric of what to look for when you're in that classroom. But again, there's nothing you have to do with that rubric in the syllabus. And common planning time, again, that's a question to ask. You're not going to see that probably up front, but how often do you plan with the other teachers at grade level and then also the special education teacher? Because if you're planning at grade level, that's common planning time, common assessments, and you want to include your special education teacher in that. Otherwise, that person is completely on the outside, just as a support. And a big issue that comes up, and this is kind of where I'll wrap it up. A big issue that comes up is who's responsible then for student performance? If you're co-teaching special education and regular education, and the students, come out and get grades and their scores and performance, who ultimately is responsible in this world of high accountability? So that's a question that has to be answered, because you cannot set up a model where teachers get very defensive to teach with another teacher because their performance score, per their class, might reflect higher or lower. So it's protecting your own territory. So we have to avoid that. But okay, fire, guitar, seat, hopefully computer back. Have a great week, and happy April Fools. No trick though, computer's still gone.